So my name is John Morris, and I have the honor of being the director of the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Washington University School of Medicine, and it's a pleasure to welcome all of you here to the annual State of the ADRC presentation. A couple quick notes. Please, if you have a handheld device, will you put it on vibrate or put it on off? If anyone needs the necessary rooms, you exit the auditorium and turn to your right. They're just opposite the elevator. For Knight ADRC folk, there is no seminar next week because we're having our External Advisory Committee meeting. And finally, the CME sheet is where, Jennifer? Out on this door? Okay, great. Terrific. Well, thanks again for everyone for coming, and we will get started. So just to begin, here are my disclosures. We're very fortunate to be funded with 4 major grant awards from the National Institute on Aging. I'll talk a little bit more about them. We also fortunate to receive funding for our research from an anonymous foundation as well as the Alzheimer Association. And then you see my personal relationships with pharma listed there. So this is the very talented group of individuals, faculty, and staff who comprise the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. This photograph is taken in 2010. And we've decided we'll do a group photo every 5 years, and so I was adding it up, and I think this is the year. So, so right after the State of the ADRC presentation, we're going to go out to the lobby of Farrell Learning Center and have our group photo, and I hope everyone associated with the Knight ADRC will join us because it's very important to us. We're very proud of the entirety of the ADRC. So when update is needed. Now, we were looking for different photographs as we were putting this together, and here's one from 21 years ago, and I decided to show it for 2 reasons. One, except for Pam Millsap and Virginia Buckles. Pam is here, and Virginia is here. All of these other important people, when we were at what then was Jewish Hospital, have all gone on to do other things. So I'm always noting that nothing is really permanent. We should take advantage of opportunities to get together. And I particularly noted many of us in the Memory and Aging Project know that Pam is going through some health issues, and just wanted to bring her to our attention. So, as I mentioned, people come and go. We've added a number of individuals in this past year. Dr. Lenice Cummings-Vaughn from Geriatrics, and Dr. Greg Day, our Knight ADRC postdoctoral fellow, and a number of new staff members, Tiffany Earle, Annalise Hernandez, Jenny Petros, Liz Rourke, Laura Swisher, and Sarah Stout, and also a visiting scholar from Tokyo, Dr. Ryoko Ihara. Dr. David Carr, who's been a longtime member of the Knight ADRC, is still here at Washington University, as is Rachel Chassie, but they've moved on to different positions outside of the ADRC. David Ruvalo and Kat Vernon have moved on to other institutions. So what we try to address in the Knight ADRC, our overarching theme is to do important research that's transdisciplinary. And we really try to be a full-service ADRC to look at the causes, the pathogenesis, the diagnosis, the treatment, and now the secondary prevention of Alzheimer's disease. We think over the years, the Knight ADRC has made a number of contributions to the field. I I happened to pick the ones in which I was involved, but there are many, many here, and I just mentioned something that my predecessor, Leonard Berg, and his colleagues developed, the clinical dementia rating, and we've developed an offshoot of that, a brief assessment, the AD8. With my colleague, Joel Price, now an emeritus professor in anatomy and neurobiology, we developed the concept of preclinical Alzheimer's disease prior to the onset of any symptoms. And with Mark Minton, the very first report of preclinical Alzheimer's disease in living people who had no symptoms came in 2006. And then Anne Fagan and her group reported that people who had preclinical Alzheimer's disease are at much higher risk of becoming symptomatic based upon CSF findings, and that was in 2007, and the ADRC as a whole, with me as the first author, reported the same for amyloid imaging. So these are all, I think, major accomplishments that we can be very proud about. Our overall theme is to study preclinical Alzheimer's disease. The reason we've chosen that is because treating symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, waiting until the symptoms are already present, has not proved to be beneficial. We haven't had success in treating people once the symptoms are there. So we would like to try to identify people who are at very high risk of becoming symptomatic in their pre-symptomatic or preclinical phase, and identify them and try to determine when we might treat them. So our four major grants, to one extent or another, really look at Alzheimer's disease throughout the lifespan. And we're asking questions such as, will preclinical Alzheimer's disease, if someone has the brain changes of Alzheimer's disease but still has no symptoms, still cognitively normal, are they destined to become symptomatic? Or might some people harbor some factors that prevent the symptoms from being expressed? Can we identify when they're changing from cognitive normality to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease? It might be that time that is most important to intervene with therapeutic agents. And these all lead to secondary prevention trials with mechanism-based drugs in cognitively normal people who are evidencing brain changes of Alzheimer's but have yet to develop the symptoms. So these are our four major grants. The actual ADRC grant is in blue here, and we've just begun another 5 years of funding. You can see that this grant was first funded in 1985, so we're now in our 31st year of continuous funding, and we have 3 science projects. Anne Fagan and John McConaughey are looking at a protein called tau through imaging and other biomarkers. We're looking at how another important protein in Alzheimer's disease, amyloid beta, is cleared from the brain, and John Cerrito is looking at this, and Eric Music is looking at how the rhythms of the brain are regulated, the circadian rhythms. So this is our ADRC grant as a whole. Another major grant in red is called Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, and that began really in 1984, a year prior to the ADRC grant. And this is also been continuously funded, and we just got renewed last summer for another 5 years. And we're looking for this issue of how normal people can transition to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, and what are the markers for this, and how might genetic inheritance play a role in this. Here's our adult children study, and this also got renewed just we just submitted the renewal application for another 5 years in May. And this is our current study. We're looking at how amyloid accumulates in asymptomatic people, again, biomarkers of this preclinical phase. So this is led by Anne Fagan. Dave Belota in psychology is looking at cognitive and attentional manifestations of preclinical Alzheimer's disease. Tammy Benzinger in imaging is looking at different imaging biomarkers, and Andrei Vlasenko is looking at brain metabolism. And then our dominantly inherited Alzheimer network is an international study. I'll talk a little bit more about it in just a moment. And I want to congratulate Randy Bateman, because in just about 1 week, he's going to become the principal investigator. So Randy, congratulations. All right, so all of our participants are seen together in something called the Memory and Aging Project. The Memory and Aging Project was inaugurated in 1979. The first participant was enrolled in August of that year. And presently, for all of those 4 grants I've just showed you, we see over 900 individuals. So it's a very large cohort of individuals. Now, in just the HASD and ADRC grants, we look at people 65 and older. And notice, because we're interested in this preclinical stage of the disease prior to symptoms, the characteristic of our cohort has changed to emphasize normal older adults. And we're looking in those individuals for signs of preclinical Alzheimer's disease. We still see almost 200 individuals who are already symptomatic with the illness, but our emphasis is on the cognitively normal phase. The adult children study, a cohort of about 300, all are cognitively normal. They're age 45 to 65 and a bit older, so they're all cognitively normal. And the DIAN study of inherited Alzheimer's disease, we have the international sites throughout 14 sites throughout the world that are enrolling people, but our DIAN site here at Washington University has 83 individuals, almost all of whom are cognitively normal as well. So if we add it up from the DIAN people, who can be as young as 19 when they enroll, to our older people who we are actively following, we're seeing people from the 20s up until the 11th decade of life, really a lifespan study of how Alzheimer's disease might begin in different groups. Majority are women. 18% in the older cohort are African American. And 3 individuals have been coming consecutively for 30 years each. Pretty dedicated group of individuals. It's remarkable. And they come from all over. They're not just here in Missouri or Illinois, but they come from all over to participate in studies, particularly studies that are unique to our site here, including the adult children study and DIAN. The adult children study I mentioned is unique. The only cohort that I'm aware of cognitively normal, middle-aged people who are studied over time with everything, and I mean everything. PET scans to look for those amyloid proteins and now also tau proteins. Spinal fluid, so get spinal taps every 3 years to look for those same proteins. MRI scans to look at the brain volume and the thickness of the cerebral cortex. Connectivity studies in the MRI scanner, genetic risk factors, and comprehensive clinical and cognitive assessments. So it's an incredibly rich group data from a very committed group of individuals. The renewal went in, as I mentioned, on May the 20th. Just for those of you not familiar with grants, it's quite an undertaking, almost 700 pages that we submitted to justify why the National Institute on Aging should give us funds to continue the research for another 5 years. And we organized it around 4 different cores and 4 science projects. And we're asking over the 5 years for the NIA to provide us with over $12 million. In the last 5 years, the adult children study alone generated 155 publications. You can see the age ranges here. At enrollment, people, as I said, were 45 and up. Of course, we began this study in 2005, so many people now have aged out of their original age category. But again, it's a longitudinal study, so we're following people over time. Now, I mentioned how dedicated they are. Many of these people, of course, had a parent who had Alzheimer's disease, so they're well aware of the illness and its effect on families. We look for PET scans for amyloid at baseline. Over 85% of our people completed that. Spinal tap, 89%. Testing for attention in Dr. Belota's laboratory, 90%. Brain MRI, 90%. And then they come back every 3 years for these tests, and I'm just amazed at how consistently they continue to participate. How many people continue to have serial spinal taps? And it makes it, as I said, an incredibly rich data set to have this longitudinal data. So if any of you here in the adult children study, you have my deep appreciation and deep gratitude, all of our appreciation and gratitude for your dedication. We added some new science in this grant renewal that was submitted. We're going to add tau PET imaging, as I mentioned. We're going to look at some additional cerebral spinal fluid indicators that may tell us who has preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and also try to look at a way to avoid, not avoid, but expand out of the spinal fluid and see if we can see indicators in the blood. We're going to be very interested in sleep, and I'll come back and talk about that at the very end briefly. And we're going to be changing the way we image amyloid. We're going to do a different type of tracer than we've done before. So all of our participants, adult children study, the program Project Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, the ADRC, all of the people enrolled in this do all of those things that we ask of them. Lots of imaging, PET scans, MRI scans, spinal taps, blood for genetics, blood for other reasons. Come back, get tested for your mental abilities. In addition to doing all of that, because they are such a remarkable group of individuals, many other investigators would like to enroll them in their studies. And so we just put together a couple of the, a few of the studies that our participants also may be asked to join. The Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, ADNI, led by Bo Ansis, stress and brain structure, led by Denise Head. I mentioned brain metabolism with Andrei Vlasenko, the JEPSI study led by Dmitry Yablonsky, looking at a special way of MRI to see if it can pick up amyloid plaques. Cognition, hearing, looking at brain wave correlates, looking at memory for things that we have to do in the future. I'll mention the A4 trial in just a moment. So you can see Mitch Summers and Linda Larson-Pryor and Julie Bugg and Randy Bateman lead those trials. In genetics, we look at Alzheimer's disease and genetics, and also another dementing illness called frontal temporal dementia that Nupar Gishal leads. We're looking for signs in the eye that may indicate somebody has Alzheimer's disease. Greg Van Stavern is reading that. We're looking at the effect of preclinical Alzheimer's disease on driving, led by Kathy Rowe. Dave Holtzman does many things, but one thing that I just wanted to mention is he's looking at the effects of having a certain form of a protein called apolipoprotein E on risk for Alzheimer's disease. Nigel Cairns, and along with colleagues, is doing some drug discovery efforts. I mentioned Eric Music and her circadian rhythms, and John Cerrito, along with Yvette Shaleen, is looking at antidepressant medications, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and a possible treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So all of these studies are recruiting participants, and we're beginning, I'm afraid, to reach some saturation because we're starting to hear from our participants who, as I say, come out and with great dedication, but they're saying, wow, which study is this for? I've been contacted a lot as late. Or my calendar has a lot of study dates on it. It sounds like there's a lot of research right now. So as I say, we ask an awful lot of our participants, and we're going to have to be very judicious in what we are asking them, and in the future we don't want them to get burnout and not continue to participate in the basic studies that we ask of them. So just a word, we have to be careful about the burden we're placing on our participants. We are very interested in supporting early stage investigators, people who may not yet have achieved a stable funding from the National Institute on Aging or National Institute on Neurologic Disease and Stroke or other federal funding. So each year we provide relatively small grants to get people started, a pilot grant. And we are funded to do this in our ADRC grant, and occasionally through philanthropy, I have funds available that we can fund some additional pilot studies in junior investigators. We're very pleased that these investigators apply to the ADRC pilot grant program from all over the university. And not just here at the School of Medicine, but you can see the many different departments that applicants come from, but also from the Danforth campus as well. So the 23 pilots in the last 5 years, I think, have been very successful because they got the junior investigators going, enough preliminary data, they could put together a more convincing application to the NIH, and those 23 pilots ended up being leveraged to get new grants, number of 27, over 21 million. So we're very pleased about the success of the pilot program, enabling people to get stable funding to do their research. And I won't go through the 4 pilot awardees that we have this year, but they are listed here. So the mission of the ADRC is, I told you our theme is preclinical Alzheimer's disease, but we're really meant to stimulate and facilitate and promote research on Alzheimer's disease here at Washington University and beyond. So we share our data, and I've already mentioned we share our participants. Other people who are doing studies here certainly can access our participants to join their study, but we also share data and tissue to investigators outside of Washington University. So altogether, in the last year, we sent cerebral spinal fluid to investigators both here at Washington University and beyond from 441 participants, data from almost 15,000 participants, brain images from almost 3,000 participants. And I mentioned many of our participants, of the 900 or so that we see, 600, almost 600 are participating in additional studies outside of our grants. So, we really do try to stimulate research and support research beyond that we're funded to do ourselves. We must track all this because the NIA is publicly funded, taxpayer dollars, and it wants to know where it grants awards, comes to Washington University under my directorship. It wants to know that we're being good stewards of those taxpayer dollars and we're contributing to research, not just for us, but for other individuals as well. So we must report all of the use of the resources that we provide, including now our program project grants. So I mentioned the DIAN. It's a unique study. It's been remarkably successful. First funding was started in 2008. And we have 13 active sites. I think I said 14 because we're trying to get another one up and running in the United States, Australia, England, and Germany. And the German federal government has established something somewhat similar to the National Institutes of Health. It's called the German Center for Neurodegenerative Research. In German, it's DZNE. And they were attracted to the DIAN concept and wanted to join and funded 2 German sites, one in Tübingen, one in Munich. It is now, the DIAN study is being funded primarily by the National Institute on Aging, but also the federal German government. And additional countries are planning to launch DIAN in their countries, again with funding from their own government. One is in Japan, and I will talk about that in just a moment, and 2 others are in Korea and in Argentina. So just this month, June 6th to 8th, a group of DIAN leaders from Washington University and from Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York went to Japan to try to help them get their DIAN study established. And I should tell you that the DIAN study is of a very rare form of Alzheimer's disease where it is inherited with a gene mutation by offspring of a person who is affected with the disease. And this is extremely rare. It's almost always young onset. The average age is around 45 or 46 when people become symptomatic. But it's an incredibly powerful group of individuals to study to try to understand the pathologic process of Alzheimer's disease beginning in the brain. But it's so rare because there are so few families, we have to go worldwide. No one center, Washington University or Mayo Clinic or Columbia University, has anywhere enough of these individuals that they're studying themselves, so we have to band together in this international network. So the more sites that join us, the more families we can enroll in this study. So that's why we're interested in this DIAN expansion. So here's a group photo from the earlier this month. Here we see Dr. Ryoko Ihara, who's our visiting scholar from Tokyo. Here's Krista Mulder. Kenji Zhang is here from our Biostatistics Core, Nigel Cairns from our Neuropathology Core. Here's Jason Hassenstaff from our Psychometric Group. Here's Virginia Buckles, Dave Holtzman, Randy Bateman, and Tammy Benzinger and our Japanese colleagues. It was a very productive meeting, but we had a little bit of time, not much, for sightseeing, so we all braved the Japanese subway system, which isn't that difficult to brave, but you can see that we're all going out to dinner on the subway. There's I'm way in the back there. Here's Jason, there's Virginia and Nigel. I think this is Randy, I think. Here's Tammy, here's Allison Goat. And many of us took the opportunity to bring our families, so here's some children. This is Tammy Benzinger's daughter and Randy Bateman's daughter. So we had a very wonderful experience in Japan. So keep mentioning our theme of characterizing the preclinical, the pre-symptomatic stage of Alzheimer's. Doesn't mean we're not interested in developing therapeutics. Many of our investigators have done this, and I point again to Dave Holtzman, who years ago developed an antibody in a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease that now has yielded this humanized antibody, solanezumab, that is being widely studied in a number of settings internationally, including the DIAN study. I'll come back and just mention that at the end. Dave and his colleagues have also been looking at an antibody developed against the other major protein in Alzheimer's disease, tau. Tim Miller has been using antisense oligonucleotides to see if it can have an effect on tau in that form. Brad Hyman from Massachusetts General Hospital and Dave have been looking at this apolipoprotein E protein that I mentioned earlier, an antibody against that. And I mentioned that John Sherito and Yvette Chalene are looking at antidepressants as a possible treatment. So we are interested in developing therapeutics. The DIAN study has led to the DIAN Trials Unit, led by Randy Bateman, that is partnering with many interested groups, including the Alzheimer's Association, the National Institute on Aging, but also many pharmaceutical companies who see the power of trying to use the agents that they are developing against Alzheimer's disease in people who carry a mutation that means they are destined to develop symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. The DIAN-TU primarily wants to give these agents to people before symptoms occur in the hopes of delaying or even preventing the onset of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And so it's a remarkable development. And that study now is well underway. The first phase of the study, I think Randy hopes to have everyone in the study and on assigned to a treatment arm or to a placebo arm by the end of this fall, and then look at which drug seems to have the best effect and go on and develop that drug to see if it can actually have a benefit for cognitive functioning in these individuals. So here are the sites that are actively recruiting in the United States, again international, including some sites that aren't in the original DIAN study, and more sites pending activation. 152 people have consented, and another 27 are being evaluated. Of those 152, 105 already have been dosed with either the active agent or the placebo. I mentioned several years ago, 2010, we were very fortunate that Charles and Joanne Knight saw fit to endow our center, the Charles F. and Joanne Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and that allowed us also to benefit in a very material way in that we were able to renovate and expand our space in the building in which the ADRC administration and Memory and Aging Project is housed, and also the DIAN-TU at 4488 Forest Park. So we've been very fortunate to have the support of the Knights in this study. We're also doing a prevention trial at that site called the A4 study. We are not the leaders of this study. This is a national study, actually North American study. Canada is involved, led by a group of Alzheimer's centers, of which we are a major part, the Alzheimer's Disease Cooperative Study. But the real energy comes from Risa Sperling, who is at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Children. But we are a very active site in enrolling participants to do this A4 study. So the A4 study is very similar to the DIAN-TU study that I mentioned, taking asymptomatic people who are at very high risk of developing dementia, in the DIAN-TU, and giving them drugs to try to delay or prevent the onset of dementia. In the DIAN-TU study, the reason people are at very high risk of developing dementia is because they inherited a causative mutation from their affected parent. This study is looking at older adults without any mutations in their families, but the reason they're at high risk of developing symptomatic Alzheimer's disease is they have a lot of amyloid plaques in their brain. And how do we know this? They undergo imaging with the PET tracer to see whether they harbor all this amyloid burden in their brain. If they do, then they are eligible to participate in this study. And the study is testing the antibody that I mentioned earlier that was developed in Dave Holtzman's lab, solunizumab, now licensed to Lilly, and that's also one of the drugs in the DIAN-TU study. So here's the A4 study. Try to prevent memory loss in people at higher risk for developing Alzheimer's symptoms, but to try to prevent it before they show symptoms. So they're using this anti-amyloid antibody, solunizumab, and cognitively normal older people with elevated brain amyloid, as shown by PET scan, are eligible. As a part of this, you will be told, if you volunteer for this, you will be told your PET scan showed elevated amyloid or no elevated amyloid. If it's not elevated, you're not eligible for the study because you're not at higher risk than anyone else. A lot of people have to be enrolled in this study. About half will get the active antibody, the solunizumab, but half will get placebo. And they have to be followed for a long period of time. So at entry, have to be between 65 and 85 years, have to be normal, have to be willing to participate in all procedures. And if you do have elevated amyloid, and you will know that because you will be told what your PET scan showed, then for 3+ years, you'll get monthly antibody infusions. So we want to look at special groups because people 65 to 70 or 75 have a lower risk of having this positive amyloid scan. So people over 75, people who have a positive family history probably are more likely to have elevated amyloid. And we want to not only enroll individuals who are Caucasian, but we want to see if this antibody is effective in all populations. So we're particularly interested in African Americans and Hispanic and Latino Americans. Erin Couture, a nurse clinician at the Memory and Aging Project, is a study coordinator, and there is her contact information if anyone knows of people or might be interested themselves to learn more about participation in this study. Well, I began by showing you the 2010 photograph of the ADRC faculty and staff, and I told you how impressive they are in their accomplishments. Not surprisingly, they get recognized for this. I apologize. I could probably give the entire state of the ADRC talking about all the accomplishments of everyone affiliated with the ADRC. I've selected these, and I apologize if I've left people out. I should not. So Dave Belota got the highest award possible at Washington University for faculty achievement for people on the Danforth campus, the Arthur Holly Compton Faculty Achievement Award. Randy Bateman was picked by the Washington University School of Medicine alumni for an achievement award. Matt Breyer, who's in medical school but working in Bo Ansys Laboratory to get his doctoral degree, was selected as the best young investigator this past January at a national meeting, the Human Amyloid Imaging Meeting. Nigel Cairns has been awarded a patent from the United States government to try to understand another brain protein in neurodegenerative disease. Dave Clifford received this school's Humanism in Medicine Award. Ida Goodwin-Woolfolk, who's the chair of our African American Advisory Committee, was just recently recognized by St. Louis University with a Community Leadership Award. Dave Holtzman was elected as a fellow to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and he will also receive the highest faculty achievement award that the School of Medicine can award, the Carl and Gertie Corey Faculty Award later this year. Brendan Lucy, an assistant professor in neurology, was designated as the Coppola Awardee this past year. Randy and Dave, on their own, ranked in the top 25 of neurologists across the country who received NIH funding. I got in there too, but that's because of all of you, so I appreciate that. Kathy Rowe was selected as the Mentor of the Year Award from the ICTS here at Washington University. Norman Seay was given the Rosa L. Parks Award for meritorious service to the community. And Cassie Ward was selected. She's our nurse practitioner in our outpatient referral service, the Memory Diagnostic Center, was named the Mission Champion by Memory Home Care Solutions in 2015. So let's give all of them a round of applause. So we also are very fortunate to have many very helpful and enjoyable and very important partners. The Alzheimer Association goes, the St. Louis chapter of the Alzheimer Association goes back to really the founding of the Knight ADRC back in the early 1980s. So we've had a long, very close relationship with an ongoing relationship with the Alzheimer Association. African American Advisory Board, I'll talk about that in just a moment. Through the African American Advisory Board, we've developed another important relationship with Links Incorporated. At Washington University, the Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging, the Hope Center for Neurologic Disorders, the Barnes Jewish Hospital Foundation, and Tina Hissong is here representing the foundation, and Washington University. I would like to say, and I think it's likely true, that we wouldn't have such a wonderful ADRC without the collegial and supportive atmosphere that is really an embodiment of Washington University as a whole and the School of Medicine in particular. We have very strong support from Chancellor Wrighton, from the Dean of the School of Medicine, Larry Shapiro, and from our department chair in neurology, Dave Holtzman. Our alumni and development colleagues have been extremely helpful, David Blasingame, David Shear, Pam Morris, Zach Silvers. And donors and friends have been extremely helpful to us. I can't list them all, but I've already mentioned Chuck and Joanne Knight. Mrs. Poletsky has been a stalwart for over 2 decades. Roger and Paula Riney, David and Betty Farrell, and Fred Simmons and Olga Mohan. So I'm sorry to embarrass people this way, but I'm good at embarrassing myself and good at embarrassing others. And I'm just going to ask Joanne Knight to stand and David Farrell to stand. And of course, both the Knights and the Farrells have been incredibly supportive of Washington University as a whole. Many buildings, including the Farrell Learning Center, where we are now, bear their names, but we're very appreciative of your support. Thank you. I mentioned our African American Advisory Board. It is very critical, as I mentioned earlier, that we study Alzheimer's disease in everyone in the metropolitan St. Louis area. And we have to be welcoming to diverse populations. And the African American Advisory Board is very helpful in helping us work our way towards that welcoming environment. They also are ambassadors to the African American community about our research mission. And they're all remarkable individuals, highly accomplished. Our African American Advisory Board Chair is Ida Goodwin-Woolfolk. I mentioned her earlier, and she's in the back, and she's raising her hand high. Ida, thank you so much. The Vice Chair is Pastor Petty, and you see the other members here, including Sally Simmons. The founding chair of the African American Advisory Board was Norman R. Seay, and he's still a very active and, I might say, vociferous member of the African American Advisory Board. When he stepped down as the chair, we decided to have an annual lecture in his honor. And believe it or not, Norman, it's been 10 years. We're having the 10th Norman R. Seay lecture this October 13th here again at the Conner Auditorium of the Farrell Center. And we're delighted that Richard King from the University of Utah will be the Farrell lecturer. Norman has pointed out to me more than once that many of our 10 or previous 9 lecturers have been women, and it's not bad to have a man from time to time. Is that right? I want to give special acknowledgement to Ida because she is first, as far as I can tell, if you live in St. Louis, then you're a friend of Ida's. And second, she has a way that people can't say no. So Ida has, with the links, has helped to get funding from the Centene Corporation to allow community lunches. There's Ida with her recent recognition. But we've had 3 community lunches at the beginning of 2012, and they've been very helpful for us to add to our African American participants. So we get the message to our African American community, and we are very pleased that some individuals decide to join the research cohort. We have a remarkable education corps. It's now renamed Outreach, Recruitment, and Education Corps. They do many marvelous things. They don't really get all the attention and credit that they deserve. And they've launched in the past 3 years an opportunity for first and second year medical students to be introduced to someone with dementia, Alzheimer's dementia. You may be aware that in the first 2 years of medical school, there's very little interaction with patients. It's mostly classroom type of activities. So people enjoy having an opportunity to interact with a real person who has an illness. But our hope is that it will destigmatize Alzheimer's dementia for medical students, give them an experience where they can interact with someone who has Alzheimer's dementia and that person's family on a monthly basis. So we call this Dementia Understanding Opportunities. And we began, as I mentioned, 2012 with 7 students paired up with someone with dementia. And we had the demand is greater than our capacity. We've decided to cap it at 9 or 10 each subsequent year. All the students and the people with dementia and their families really enjoy it, 100% completion. And here's one quote from a medical student: "As much as the Dementia Understanding Opportunities program taught me about the lack of compassionate care for terminally ill patients, it taught me more about love and facing life with great hardship. The love and responsibility of the couple he was with to each other is inspiring, far more than any lecture or novel can capture." Including Still Alice. We need we're always interested in getting nominations for people with dementia to serve in this role. And if you have someone that you know that might be a person, doesn't have to be a member of our research team, research cohort, it can be outside of that, please contact Jennifer Phillips, and there's her contact information. We are dedicated to bringing on the next generation or generations of investigators in Alzheimer's disease. And so we do devote a great deal of time to education and training. Here are our current summer students. As you can see them listed here, and 2 foreign visiting scholars. I mentioned Dr. Ihara, and later this summer, Dr. Liu from China will join us. So I talked earlier about participant burden. We ask a lot of our participants. We're beginning to get a little bit of pushback. One of the things that might help individuals continue to participate is if we start providing them with some of their research results. At present, we don't tell them what the results of their spinal fluid analysis is or their brain imaging program. But it's a complicated issue. It's not easily done. One bit of research we possibly could give people is whether or not they test positive for that apolipoprotein E gene, and if they get a special form of it called E4, generally their risk for developing Alzheimer's disease is higher. But across the field, the general idea is not to test for ApoE4, because if you don't have it, it doesn't mean you're not going to develop symptomatic Alzheimer's. If you do have it, you're at higher risk for developing symptomatic Alzheimer's, but it doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get it. And if you do have it, there's nothing really that we can do at this point to minimize that risk. But some of our participants say, well, listen, if I found out I carried this form of the ApoE gene, it may prompt me to get my affairs in order, and I might start doing things I should be doing, exercise, diet. The counter to that counterpoint is we should be doing those things anyway. But anyway, some people want to know their test results. So not our study, but a study led by people in Boston, enrolled 162 people and did their ApoE testing. 2/3 of the people were given their results. They did or did not have E4. 1/3 were not told. And there were no differences, and people didn't have catastrophic reactions if they were told they had E4. Those who learned that they were E4 were more likely to think that they were at greater risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, and they had some distress. 1 year later, they were also more likely to have adopted a health change. Now, that wasn't necessarily exercise and diet. They started taking vitamin E primarily, but it did have an effect. But those who, and they were also more willing to participate in research studies. So this is why I think that we should be considering returning at least some research results to our participants. But here's the downside to that. So if you know that you're at greater risk for developing Alzheimer's, you may think less of yourself, less confidence. And that might affect your research performance. So one study, again, looking at APOE, if they were told they were E4 negative, not at increased risk, they thought they self-rated their memory as being better than persons who didn't know they were E4 negative. And persons who knew they were E4 positive thought their memory was worse than persons who didn't know they were E4 positive. So if they knew they were E4 positive, higher risk, they performed worse on memory tests than their counterparts who also were E4 positive but weren't told. So knowledge of their status affected their cognitive performance. And so that's something we're going to have to think about as we determine whether to return research results to individual performance. All right, so there have been 27 federally funded Alzheimer's centers just this past year. Maybe there are 28 now, and maybe a 29th will be named. The one at UCLA had been around for a while but didn't succeed in getting refunded. The two new ADRCs are at Yale and Stanford. Another round of applications will come this fall. So this is unfortunately an all too familiar graph to some of us. Back in 2005, this is the amount of research dollars awarded to the National Institute of Aging. Not all of this goes to Alzheimer research, but this is the primary funding of Alzheimer research. And the funds have gradually increased over the past 10 years. Unfortunately, this rate of increase isn't enough to keep up with inflation. So the purchasing power has actually gone down 20% from what it was 10 years ago. Each grant award is overall is 20% less than we would have had 10 years ago. So we work harder and harder to get less and less federal funding. And it's hard to get federal funding. If you ask for a grant of $500,000 a year, $500,000 a year, 93% of you will not get that grant awarded. Only 7% are successful. If you ask for more money, like our grants, remember I'm asking for $12 million in the adult children's study, 96% of people will not get funded. This is a very difficult environment. Now, if you're a new investigator, early stage investigator, it's slightly better, but it is very difficult. I mentioned at the very beginning in my disclosures, we're very fortunate to have our 4 grants. The odds of doing this are remarkable. Really a great leadership, I think. But. So it's uncertain now when we reapply to get our grants refunded. Matter of fact, we almost have given up expecting to get it refunded on our first try. If we don't get it on the first try, we get a second shot at it. We're starting to prepare to resubmit our adult children's study grant, thinking it won't get funded on the first try. It's very discouraging for young investigators. I mentioned our pilot program. That's great. It's been successful. They've done well, but it's hard to get grants. And no grant now awarded from the NIA will allow us to increase each year to account for inflation. So if we put someone's salary down in year 1, we can't, if we tied their salary raise, the annual raise each year to the grant, we wouldn't be able to afford it because there's no mechanism to allow for raising people each year for inflationary increase. So increasingly, we need to collaborate with our industry partners, which we are doing, and with generous donors, which I've already mentioned, to accomplish our grant aims. We simply cannot fund things with a 20% reduction in purchasing power, with the difficulty in getting grants, with no inflationary increase. We can't do it alone from NIA funding. This is very different than 10 years ago. Matter of fact, in this adult children's study renewal application that went in May, all the new science is being supported by gift funds. So I just want to mention I mentioned Leonard Berg, my mentor, the founding director of the Knight ADRC. When he retired, we began a series of symposiums every 2 or 3 years, and the 9th Berg Symposium will be this fall, October the 30th, 2015, at the EPNEC Center here. And it's looking at this very interesting relationship between sleep and Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative illnesses. Does sleep predispose, if you have sleep disorder, does it predispose you to getting Alzheimer's? If you have Alzheimer's, does it disturb your sleep? So very interesting, and so please mark this on your calendar. So finally, I mentioned Randy will become principal investigator of DIAN in a week or so. I'm going to relinquish the directorship of the Knight ADRC in about 3 years, and I've identified a successor. I am not retiring, even in 2018, but as long as we're operating the program projects, HASD and ACS, I will continue to lead them as a principal investigator. And right now, I'm going to continue as directing the Memory and Aging Project, the clinical research office, the clinical cores for each of those grants. So I think with our new leadership group, it'll be unequaled, and like the Knight ADRC, it will be, no one will be able to approach the talent that we have here, and I think our leadership group will represent that. Now, it's an open secret to some of you who will succeed me as the Knight ADRC Director in 2018, but I thought I'd give you a brief point here. It's my new grandson, four months old, and I don't know if you can see, but it says Dr. McCutie. So he'll be ready to go in a few years. Thank you very much.